Dawn settled cold and silent over the Ardennes, the kind of winter light that makes metal look blue and breath hang in the air like smoke. In a small Belgian town, American prisoners stood in the frost, passing 5-gallon cans from hand to hand, pouring American gasoline into German tanks at gunpoint. And watching them calm, analytical, already calculating the miles ahead was Joachim Peiper, commander of Kampfgruppe Peiper, the spear point of the Ardennes offensive. It was a strange scene inside the Battle of the Bulge. American fuel feeding German armor, American rations feeding German soldiers. A battlefield where the lines between victor and vanishing hope blurred with every breath of winter air. But beneath that moment lay a deeper truth, one that reached far beyond this single town, far beyond December 1944, and into the heart of World War II itself. Because what happened next was not decided by courage, or by the steel of the panzers, or even by Peiper's reputation for boldness. It was decided by something far quieter, far more decisive. The collision between German logistics stretched to the breaking point and American logistics operating at industrial scale. What happens when an army fights harder than ever, yet its fuel tanks run dry? The answer begins here. The final winter of World War II settled heavily over Europe when Adolf Hitler ordered one last gamble, an attack meant to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. It would become the Battle of the Bulge, a bold strike into the snow-covered Ardennes that demanded speed, secrecy, and above all, fuel. The operation carried a name that hinted at defiance, the Ardennes Offensive. In a small Belgian town, American prisoners stood in the frost, passing 5-gallon cans from hand to hand, pouring American gasoline into German tanks at gunpoint. But even before the first shot was fired, officers understood the plan rested on a fragile hope. German logistics had been decaying for years, and now the panzers were being asked to outrun a supply system that could barely support static defense. Kampfgruppe Peiper was chosen as the sharpest point of the spear. Led by Joachim Peiper, it combined seasoned tank crews, armored infantry, and the heaviest firepower the SS could gather. The mission was clear: break through, move fast, never stop. Momentum would be their armor, speed their only protection against the coming Allied response. But behind the confidence of Peiper's men, the numbers told a colder truth. The entire offensive three armies, hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, received barely 5 million gallons of fuel. German planners quietly calculated they needed twice that amount just to reach their objectives. It was a mathematical impossibility disguised as an operational directive. So the solution became a gamble. They would steal fuel from the Americans. And that is why, on the morning of December 17th, Kampfgruppe Peiper rolled into Bulge and found what German commanders feared they might never see again: an American fuel depot intact. The Americans had retreated so quickly that 50,000 gallons of gasoline sat untouched, stacked in neat rows of jerry cans under the pale winter Sunday. It was enough to refill Peiper's spearhead, enough to keep the drive moving west. American prisoners worked the pumps, while SS tank crews stood watch. The roads west of Bulge twisted through forests, villages, and narrow river crossings. Snow fell in thin, drifting sheets as Kampfgruppe Peiper pushed deeper into the Ardennes. Their orders were unchanged: move fast, strike hard, keep the momentum alive. In the early hours, the speed of their advance suggested the plan might work. American defenses were scattered and uncoordinated, caught off guard by the sudden blow. Yet, every mile carried a silent cost. Engines drank fuel faster than the supply trucks behind them could hope to deliver. The spearhead was advancing, but its tether to German logistics was thinning with every kilometer. Peiper knew it, his officers knew it, the men in the tanks felt it in the tension of every halt and every restart. Stavelot emerged through the haze of winter by midday. A small Belgian town divided by the Amblève River, its stone bridge standing like a gate into the deeper heart of the Ardennes offensive. American troops had fortified the approaches, digging in anti-tank guns, machine gun nests, and roadblocks. They were determined to hold the bridge long enough to buy time for reinforcements. The fighting was brutal. German armor pressed forward through narrow streets as American gunners fired until their positions were overrun. Snow and smoke mixed into a gray fog that blurred the line between movement and threat. For 3 hours the battle raged, the bridge surviving demolition charges that failed to detonate. And with that stroke of luck, Kampfgruppe Peiper surged across the river. The way west was open again, but the greater objective was still ahead. Intelligence promised a major American fuel depot near Stavelot, a cache so large it could power the spearhead for days. If Peiper found it, the Battle of the Bulge could stretch deeper, cutting toward the Meuse and fracturing the Allied line. So, the search began. Recon teams moved in every direction, probing side roads, barns, warehouses, any place that might conceal millions of gallons of gasoline. But Peiper's expectations were shaped by German practice. A fuel depot meant storage tanks, infrastructure, vehicles, a visible footprint etched into the landscape. Nothing like that appeared. They searched the town. They searched the outskirts. They found scattered cans, minor dumps, nothing that matched the scale promised by intelligence reports. And time was slipping away. American resistance stiffened. Fog lifted just enough for artillery observers to find their mark, and the familiar pressure of enemy fire crept closer. Every halt to search meant another chance for U.S. forces to regroup. Momentum, Peiper's greatest ally in the Ardennes offensive, was beginning to fracture. The truth, though he did not know it, lay just a few hundred yards away. 3 million gallons of gasoline stacked in simple jerry cans along a roadside, no buildings, no tanks, no camouflage. Exactly because it did not look like a depot in the German sense, Peiper's men drove past it without a second glance. It was the offensive's highest moment and its most consequential mistake. A turning point hiding in plain sight. For now, the spearhead kept moving west, engines rumbling, tracks grinding through snow and mud. But the fuel burned faster than fortune could replace it, and the weight of what they had missed was already beginning to settle over the advance. The high tide of Kampfgruppe Peiper had been reached. From this point forward, the wave would begin to recede. The miles beyond Stavelot grew harder with every turn. Snow deepened, roads narrowed, and the Americans no longer fell back in confusion. They held, resisted, and struck from every ridge and crossroads. As Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced, the engines of their tanks told the truth long before any officer voiced it. Fuel gauges dipped lower. The sound of idling motors grew shorter. The pace slowed. The missed depot at Stavelot was already exerting its invisible pull. What should have been a renewed surge west began to feel like a long exhale, the pressure bleeding out of the spearhead. Every village required ammunition they could not afford. Every skirmish cost fuel they could not replace. Momentum, once their greatest advantage in the Ardennes offensive, was dissolving beneath their tracks. By the time Peiper reached the outskirts of Stoumont, the advance was no longer an advance. It was a struggle to stay alive. American units fought with increasing coordination. Artillery struck at road junctions. Engineers felled trees into the paths of panzers. Small infantry squads attacked from basements and barn lofts, slowing the SS column to walking pace. And the Americans had something Peiper no longer possessed: steady supply. As the ring tightened around Stoumont, German logistics finally cracked open for all to see. The spearhead had fuel for only a few more miles. Ammunition was rationed by the handful. Vehicles were abandoned where they stalled. Nothing in Peiper's training or experience could overcome the sheer mathematical certainty of depletion. German soldiers wore American gloves, scarves, parkas, anything they had taken from overrun positions. Frostbite spread among units that lacked proper winter gear. Their rations were now almost entirely American, scavenged from captured dumps. The brightly labeled K-Ration boxes, a quiet reminder of the widening gulf between two armies in World War II. Inside aid stations, the contrast grew even sharper. German medics worked with almost nothing. No morphine, no sulfa drugs, bandages washed and reused until they fell apart. Wounded men bit down on straps as bones were set or limbs were amputated in dim basements lit by lanterns. Peiper's officers tried to keep morale steady, but their faces revealed the truth. They were fighting a modern battle with the tools of an exhausted empire. Then came the final blow. An attempted Luftwaffe resupply drifted off course. Most parachute canisters fell into American lines. The supplies tantalizingly close but unreachable. It confirmed what Peiper already knew: no help was coming. On December 21st, the Americans closed the ring around Stoumont. 17 miles from their starting point, the spearhead of the Battle of the Bulge was frozen in place. No fuel, little ammunition. Hungry, exhausted, surrounded. Peiper gathered his officers. There would be no breakout with tanks. No last push west. No chance to complete the mission. The vehicles, Tiger Tunes, Panthers, half-tracks would be destroyed. The wounded would be left with captured American medical supplies. The men would attempt to slip eastward on foot through snow and darkness, carrying only what they could manage. In the early hours of December 24th, Kampfgruppe Peiper, abandoned its armor, and vanished into the forest. Behind them, the mightiest machines Germany could build sat silent, loaded with ammunition, immobilized not by enemy fire, but by empty fuel tanks. It was a retreat shaped not by defeat in battle, but by the unforgiving arithmetic of logistics. Major Hal McCown had expected to die when his command post was overrun. Instead, he found himself inside Kampfgruppe Peiper's lines, cold, hungry, but alive. For 3 days, he watched the SS spearhead from the inside, observing not just their tactics, but the reality behind their shrinking power. When McCown eventually escaped and returned to American lines, his report gave U.S. commanders something more valuable than maps or documents. It offered an unfiltered look at the collapsing heart of German logistics. McCown described men wearing American overshoes and gloves because their own winter gear had never arrived. He spoke of aid stations that performed amputations without anesthesia, of soldiers cheering when they opened captured K-Rations, of rations so poor that American prison food later seemed luxurious in comparison. The American High Command did not need confirmation, but McCown's words sharpened their understanding. The United States, fighting thousands of miles from home, still maintained a supply chain that reached from factories in Detroit to foxholes in Belgium. American logistics brought fuel by pipeline, ammunition by rail, and food in standardized containers that moved seamlessly from ship to truck to frontline units. It was coordination on a continental scale. German commanders after the war admitted what their soldiers had sensed. General Hasso von Manteuffel told U.S. interrogators that after 1943 the war was already lost, not because of battles, but because Germany could no longer replace what it consumed. He contrasted horse-drawn wagons with American truck fleets, bombed railways with Allied ports operating at full capacity, ration shortages with the industrial rhythm of a nation untouched by enemy bombers. Even Joseph Sepp Dietrich, who rarely accepted responsibility, could not escape the facts. His 6th SS Panzer Army began the Battle of the Bulge with fuel for barely half the distance to Antwerp. Capturing American depots was not a contingency plan, it was the plan. And no professional army, then or now, builds a campaign around hope. From the global perspective, the lesson resonated far beyond December 1944. World War II was not merely a contest of strategy or battlefield skill. It was a contest of systems, industrial, logistical, economic, and in that contest, the United States held an advantage so great that even brilliant tactics could only delay the inevitable. In the Ardennes, that truth became impossible to ignore. When the snow finally settled over the Ardennes, the battlefield revealed a truth that had been hiding beneath the gunfire. The panzers left behind at Stoumont stood silent and cold, their hulls intact, their ammunition still stored neatly inside. What stopped them was not enemy fire or a tactical defeat. It was something quieter, something far more decisive: empty fuel tanks. In that moment, the Battle of the Bulge became more than a failed breakthrough. It became a lesson carved into steel. The panzers left behind at Stoumont stood silent and cold, their hulls intact, their ammunition still stored neatly inside. He studied the map, nodded, and offered only a small, almost polite apology. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the calm acceptance of a soldier who understood that war turns on moments as small as an overlooked road. But that missed depot symbolized something larger than one man's mistake. It represented the widening gap between German logistics stretched to the point of collapse and American logistics operating at a scale the world had never seen. A simple K-Ration box, waterproof, compact, filled with calories and small comforts, held more than food. It held proof of an industrial system capable of feeding millions of soldiers across multiple continents at once. German soldiers understood this when they opened those boxes. They tasted chocolate and real coffee, but what they were really tasting was inevitability. A nation that could produce millions of these meals every week could also produce the tanks, trucks, and aircraft required to sustain a global war. It was the quiet arithmetic behind the Ardennes offensive, and behind all of World War II. Strategy shapes battles, but logistics shapes history. The legacy of the Bulge endures for that reason. It reminds us that courage and skill matter deeply, profoundly, but they cannot stand alone. No army outruns its supply lines. No breakthrough succeeds on empty tanks. And no amount of willpower can replace the machinery of a nation prepared for the long war rather than the dramatic moment. As you reflect on this final chapter of the Ardennes, consider the deeper question the battle still asks us today. In any conflict, past or future, what truly determines victory? The daring thrust of armored columns, or the unseen network that keeps them moving? If this story has offered you a new way to see the Battle of the Bulge, I invite you to stay with us. There are more campaigns, more lessons, and more voices from history waiting to be explored. Even in the darkest shadows, truth finds a way to be seen. Subscribe to WWII Tales, Shadows of War, and tell us in the comments which hidden side of the war you want to understand better.